Klynton Wanganeen, I'm going to invite you to come to the podium in a minute. Klynton is of Narungga and Ngarrindjeri descent. He has a long history as an advocate for Aboriginal affairs, including, this is a lovely list, as a former regional council chairperson, a South Australian Zone Commissioner for ASTIC, as the inaugural Commissioner for Aboriginal Engagement in the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and he has held numerous positions in the vocational, educational and employment areas. For the past 2 years, he's been working as a consultant specialising in governance, strategic planning, Aboriginal community engagement, leadership and cultural awareness. And he's here today to share his views on partnerships, drawing on his very wide-ranging experience at the regional, state and national level. And I've got no idea what he's going to say, so I think it's going to be a real adventure. Thank you, Klynton.
Thank you, Leanne. I'll go to that one first. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you a history lesson. First thing I'd like to do is thank Vince for the Welcome to Country this morning, and state that Welcome to Country is a very important part of Aboriginal protocols, as well as the acknowledgement of country. Sorry, Leanne, I didn't provide my up-to-date bio, so I've been a consultant for 5 years now. But I'm not going to be talking about partnerships purely in a Landcare context. But our previous speaker spoke about a few things that really picked up my ears. Land tenure has always been a big issue, and I've been to a lot of forums where Aboriginal people will do a welcome to country, and some preface that by saying, I welcome you to country, but we don't actually own any of our own land. Engagement is a very important part of Aboriginal life, but for community life in general, and people really respect and respond to early engagement and not be attacked on afterthought. Enterprise, it's one of the aspirations of Aboriginal people right across this country. It's something that we've been locked out of for a long time, but there are some opportunities in front of us. And like Greg says, it's a vehicle that Aboriginal people want to use to get to where they want to in their own country. But I also want to talk about the importance of Welcome to Country. But if you look at this timeline, it's not up on the board, is it? Okay, what you see there is the approximate historical timeline of people around the world. If you look at the right-hand side, you'll look at ancient Rome, 400 AD. Then you go to ancient Greece, ancient Israel, ancient China, ancient India. About 5,000 BC, ancient Mesopotamia starts building the first cities. And then you look on the far left, you'll see Aboriginal people living in Australia. Earlier this year in the Australian newspaper, I'm not sure if you've seen it, there was a small article talking about DNA samples taken from Aboriginal people around the country, and some of those DNA samples were from hair from Aboriginal people living at Point Pearce in 1972. And it showed that Aboriginal people have been living at Point Pearce for at least 50,000 years, longer than it took to create those two gulfs. When you look at the map of Aboriginal Australia, there's 600 to 700 different language groups. When the Creator created our world, put us on our various parts of land, not everything we needed to survive and thrive was in our local area. Some groups had access to the reeds for basket weaving, the right timber for fire sticks. Other groups had access to the right stones for tool making. ochre for ceremony, and others had other knowledges. Aboriginal people for thousands of years were largely non-warfaring. We've developed protocols how to coexist, and regularly every year or a couple of years there'd be ceremonies where the opportunity to trade would take place. When we are en route to trade, we may have to travel through the country of 5 or 10 different Aboriginal groups. When we travel, we had to acknowledge we're coming to someone else's country. We had to show them respect as the traditional owners of that country. They, in turn, would welcome us to country, tell us which way we can go, make sure we had access to water and food and any of the tools that we couldn't lug with us, so that we can get on our journey to go to the place where ceremony has taken place. Ceremonies took place where we did trade, we did share information, we shared technologies, we shared stories, information, and when you look at the trade routes goes the length and breadth of Australia, the song lines go right around Australia, the storylines go right around Australia, notwithstanding that some groups will have different contexts or different parts to their stories. But for us to be able to do all that, we had to show that respect. And when you look at the life that we had, the flora, the fauna, the natural environment that showed us the differences between our boundaries, whether it's hills, mountains, creeks, rivers, lakes or gulfs, those were the natural environments. Aboriginal people have stories for how those environments were created, for the flora and fauna that we used to survive. Different Aboriginal groups will have stories about it. Adnyamathanha, for example, will have a story that'll tell you why the crow is black and why the magpie is black and white. Stories of morals and creation. Ngarrindjeri will tell you about how the River Murray was created by the Murray cod, Ngarrindjeri. Narungga will tell you why Winder the owl is not allowed to appear in daylight. So those stories tell us why things are as they are. And it goes back thousands upon thousands of years, and they are carried on through ceremony, song, dance, art, whether it's rock art or the like. And when you look at land care, land management, conservation, the roots of all that come from Aboriginal Australia, thousands upon thousands of years. So there is a lot to learn from Aboriginal people and Aboriginal knowledges. So I wanted to show you a little bit about that. But when you look at the fact that we had the driest state in South Australia, in the driest continent of the world, the capacity to survive and thrive was important. Talking about partnerships, I really don't look at it as a set of skills that you need. It's about qualities that you need. And during this conference, you'll see a number of examples about partnerships. I'd also like, before I go on, to acknowledge that the children who done the presentation from the Clare High School, it was fantastic this morning. I want to acknowledge the other Aboriginal people in this room who come from different nation groups to be here. I want to acknowledge everyone from the Landcare movement here and my co-presenters. But getting back to some of the qualities, they seem so simple, but they're quite often forgotten. You have to remember that Aboriginal people are dealing with a raft of issues on a daily basis. And I'll talk about my brother John Buckskin over there. He's the chairperson of the Point Pearce Community Council. Haven't had any direct funding from government for just on 13 years. So John and Eddie and the council, they're all volunteers. John's full-time employed and has to double as the chairperson of the council and the de facto CEO of the organisation. So Aboriginal people have a lot of things on their plate. Your priorities may not be our priorities. I was working for TAFE and I went to Yalata for a meeting on a Thursday morning. Got there, the chairperson, who I've known through football for probably 15 years, said to me, "Candy," now that's my nickname, I'm Klynton, there is my real name. He said, "Candy, you're the 38th bureaucrat we had here this week." 38th bureaucrat to Yalata. And he said, "You know what? You're all coming here in different four-wheel drives. Just imagine the waste of money you fellas are having when you can actually work with us and put that money into good use here on our community." That was a sobering point for me. Relationships is vital to partnerships, and relationships take time. You have to build up your trust. Aboriginal people have a long history in this country and a long history of distrust in government. I worked for government for 20-something years, but as an Aboriginal person, every time the government wants to give us something, I always look for what they're going to take away while they're giving us something. It's just part of reality. You have to get to know your community that you're dealing with. There are a lot of knowledges hidden away in the Aboriginal community that's related to the work that you do. Examples recently is in the Northern Territory, the Aboriginal people use their traditional knowledge to get rid of tilapia in Kakadu National Park. Fire stick burning mentioned. Long traditional knowledges. Bill Gammage wrote a book called The Biggest Estate on Earth, which talked about Aboriginal land management way before it became commonplace. That book actually is stories about how, for thousands upon thousands of years, our people have managed, and by the way, we didn't actually have very many examples of extinction of flora or fauna during our time, but there's been an enormous lot of loss in the last couple of years. Aboriginal people will not rubber stamp a proposal for anyone. At this point in time, engagement has to be early and it has to be often. You have to look at the parameters on why you want a partnership with Aboriginal people. There has to be mutual benefit. When you're looking at building that relationship, there has to be mutual respect and an eye on the long term. Aboriginal people have a view that when we say something to government, they hear us but don't really take notice. When the same thing is said by non-Aboriginal people, the government really take notice. So the things you're saying about Landcare, we've been saying for quite a long time. When dealing with Aboriginal people, be prepared to make mistakes. You're not going to be perfect, because we certainly ain't. You've got to be genuine, you've got to be committed. When you look at capacity, you have to have the capacity to work with us just as much as we have to have the capacity to work with you. Capacity building is a two-way street, and that's quite often forgotten. You can't come to us with a new U-Butte idea and say, "Have I got something to you, something wonderful for you?" If you've got a concept, you can discuss it with us. But if it's going to go anywhere, it has to be co-designed by us and co-delivered by us. Otherwise, it is doomed for failure and a waste of time, money and effort. Don't promise what you can't deliver is an important message. If you're engaging with the Aboriginal community and you're asked a hard question that you don't know the answer to, don't fumble your way through and try to come up with an answer. Be honest, say you don't know, take it on notice, and then get back with the right answer. By doing that, it's an opportunity to re-engage, but more importantly, it's starting to build up trust. Because if you say you don't know and you re-engage with us, we'll talk about how wonderful you are because you took the time to come back to us. But if you say, "I'm not looking at you, Danny, I'm going to do this," and you don't, then we'll say, "You're no good because you don't walk the talk, you don't do as you say." And that's no reflection on the Aboriginal Lands Trust, because they do a wonderful job. Partnerships is a huge opportunity for Aboriginal people. We have aspirations, we have communities, we have families. One of the things I try to reflect on people, that the Aboriginal population in South Australia is not that big a population. If you watch the footy Saturday night, Thursday night, Adelaide Oval, the entire Aboriginal population in South Australia would just over 3/4 fill that stadium. We don't have a huge population. Therefore, for the issues we face, we wonder why it's so hard to fix. What we also have to live with is the electoral cycle, because politics means that governments plan to win government. They don't plan for the long term that we need to make a real difference. That's where the relationships you build with Aboriginal people will make that difference. Relationships is important. Timelines is important. You may have a short window of 6 to 8 weeks. Aboriginal people can't respond in that short time. I look at the community at Point Pearce. This year, we probably had a funeral every week since February, and we've still got another couple coming up. So our people are caught up with a hell of a lot of issues. Whether you're talking native title, everyone thought Aboriginal people was going to steal the backyards of non-Aboriginal people. On York Peninsula, 95% of the native title on York Peninsula doesn't exist. So it's not a panacea for Aboriginal people. Reconciliation is a real big issue. Recognise has been a big discussion point. Recently we had discussion points about the Australia Day. Just remember, non-Aboriginal people were raising all those issues, not Aboriginal people. Despite the long history we have in this country, despite the short history of non-Aboriginal people, we are all in it together. We were once custodians and controllers of our country, but we still have a role to play wherever you are in this country, and we can provide that support, we can provide knowledges, and we can provide the opportunity to build a better country. Because for all of you in this room, the reason you're in here is because you care about the land. And the reason you care about the land is because you care about your people. Well, just like you, Aboriginal people care about all people. So with that, thank you very much. I was going to run away.
No such luck. Not yet. Thank you. And one of the things that I found during that was I really felt like I was coming in to a place of quietness with you, Klynton, to really listen to what you had to say, and I really appreciated that. I felt like you brought us in. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, because I've done some work with Aboriginal communities, and some of the feedback I've got is that they really appreciate it when they see me again and again and again. So there's this sense of longevity of the relationship. I'm not just zipping in and zipping out. Can you make some comments on that and how important that might be to communities?
Well, as I said, knowing you're in it for the long haul is very important. And I'll just relate to a story that with Robert Tickner, used to be the Federal Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. He has been chairperson of the Red Cross for quite a number of years, and he was implementing programs to work with Aboriginal people in regional and remote parts of Australia. And one of the things he said when he allocated funds from the Red Cross, and he also won funding from the federal government and state governments, one of the things he said is, when that timeline for those funding from the federal and state governments run out, I'm going to commit the Red Cross funds for the long term, because the issues is a long-term proposition. The people on the ground have the solutions, have to be engaged to make sure that the engagement takes time and effort. If you fly in and fly out, all they see is you for a moment. When you're gone, they're back to everything else that they have to deal with at the local level. Just remember the Yalata example. 38 bureaucrats by Thursday morning. So relationships are important. Relationships and partnerships can't succeed without relationships. Quite often, one of the things they forget to talk about in partnerships is how you resolve conflict, how you deal with difficult issues. What is the funding story? What are the resources that's required to make things a success? These are things that all should be part of the upfront planning. And to make the difference, when you've done a good turn by us, we will always do good turns by you, and we'll always promote you as someone that's committed for the long term. So relationships is not a short-term thing. You enter into a partnership with us, you're a fantastic person for life, because we'll always respect the work and the effort you put in for us. And it is work and it is effort, because some of our communities have fourth and fifth generation unemployed people. It wasn't always that way. When I look at the tenure of farmers on York Peninsula, and they say, well, my family's been here for 5 generations. And I'll say, that's good, and I'm glad you're prospering. But my family's been here for thousands of generations, and when your family's farm first started, my people were the workers that were employed to clear it and help you get your farm established. So think about history, think about relationship, but also think about reciprocity, because that is very important, and that's the way we will go forward, because we're here on this earth for a short time, but the descendants we leave behind are going to deal with what we create. And by the way, Greg, I have 4 children, 10 grandchildren, and 1 on the way.
Thank you.